Good evening, everybody. My apologies for being late. I had an interesting meeting that I wanted to attend. Um, Thank you. I'm glad that my wife was able to step up and let everybody know that I was going to be late. Like I said, unless there's it's been a long day, uh, so I'm probably a little tired. But it was an extremely productive meeting. So I'll share some of the things I found, and we can jump right into day 20 of the greatest book ever written. Let me pull up um, the Genesis that we went through. Let me see here. So, like I said, we're on day 20, Genesis 41, which we're going to continue on with, Pharaoh telling Joseph his dream and so forth. And let's get this done so we can get some rest. No, I agree with you. Thank you, Jules. So, anyways, right now I'm in D.C., Washington D.C. with my wife. We'll be returning back home tomorrow, and I had a meeting with a director that I met, in December, so a few months back. That works for the National Security Council. That was part of, the Trump administration, and they're part of the Biden administration, and they're going to be leaving in the next 30 days or so. But he reached out to me because of some of the research I was doing, some of the things with regards to the election, with regards to some issues of national security that I had brought to the attention of some people within our government. And he wrote me a really nice note while he was working in the White House, and I got to know him and another person in the White House. And so I met with him and found out a little bit of what's taking place right now within the current White House. And a lot of these fake videos that are appearing as though Joe Biden is not in the White House are all fabricated. He made it very clear that he has seen him in the White House. He is in the White House. He's not exactly sure who's creating this false propaganda that Joe Biden is not there. And so I know that might be a buzzkill, but it is what it is. He's a conservative, but he was appointed to the position regardless of party. And so I have no reason not to believe him. He's been very forthcoming in explaining a lot of things. I did a little bit of research here and there along the way that he asked me to look into things. And, he's very concerned, about the direction of this country. And we had a talk for a couple hours about his experience working on the National Security Council for the past 2 years. Now he's going to take some time off. And I told him after he maybe takes a break, he can, maybe we should talk. He happens to be from Illinois. I'm from Illinois. And when he comes back into the state of Illinois, we're going to probably meet up and discuss a few things here and there. So that's why I'm late today. I didn't anticipate him being available. He literally just got off of work from being in the White House tonight. And, he took the time to meet up because of the conversations that we've had. So thank you for your patience. I appreciate it. And so let's jump right into Genesis 41. So Pharaoh told Joseph his dream. And the dream, this was back with the 7 cows, that were really healthy, and then 7 cows that were scrawny and basically famished, and then 7 heads of grain, full and beautiful, and then 7 heads of grain that were, bless you, blessed that were shriveled. And so after Joseph told the Pharaoh these dreams, he decided to let Joseph spearhead uh, the collection of one fifth of all the crops to prepare for a possible famine that was going to take place. And Joseph did all this. The Pharaoh put him in charge of everything. He was his second in command. He created all these stores of food, which allowed Egypt to not suffer the catastrophic results of famine that took place in the region. And, Joseph ended up being right that this was going to take place. He was given this information by God, and as a result, Pharaoh made him the second most powerful person in Egypt, and only the Pharaoh had more power than Joseph at this time. So, when Jacob heard the grain was available, Jacob is Joseph's dad. He wanted his children and Joseph's brothers to go to get some food because they're all literally starving to death. But he did not want Benjamin to go because Benjamin was the only other child of Rachel. And so Rachel was, as we know, she died prematurely in childbirth. Actually, she died with childbirth to Benjamin. And so Jacob was obviously, after losing Joseph, he didn't want to have to worry about possibly losing, Benjamin as well. So Benjamin ended up going anyways. And if I'm not mistaken, what ended up happening is Joseph created a little bit of a trap. And I think I'm getting ahead of this Genesis story, but we can just go right to it. Joseph kind of set up his brother Benjamin to see if his other brothers from their other mother, it wasn't Rachel, I'm thinking Leah. I think Leah was the mother of the other children, if they would once again abandon their brother, which they viewed maybe as a half brother. And it turns out that fortunately they did not. But there was a really good lesson to be learned, that they had realized how much pain that what they did with their first decision in selling Joseph to they sold him into slavery. First they were going to leave him for dead, and then they decided to sell him to somebody who sold him to be a slave for one of the higher up officials in the military, I guess in Egypt. And then obviously we all know why that happened. They had a tremendous amount of what's the word? Not resent. They weren't resentful. They were more of what's the word I'm looking for? When you're envious. They were envious of Joseph, and envy is one of the 7 deadly sins. They were envious of the attention that Joseph had received from Jacob, and this would grate on them. And we talked a little bit about this, I think maybe 2 days ago, day 18, where parents have a responsibility to their children to make sure that the actions that they take with each child does not taint the views of each child, taint the views that each child has toward each other. You can't play favorites, because if you play favorites, there's a lot of long-term repercussions, and they're not always positive. They can be extremely negative. So in the case of Jacob, giving preference to Joseph over his other siblings, they struck out at Joseph. So even if Joseph had nothing to do with it, and it was all Jacob's doing, this would have been a big problem. And I mentioned that if Rachel had not died in childbirth to Benjamin, maybe she would have been there to make sure that that Jacob did not give preference to Joseph in a way that was detrimental to his siblings, that would lead them to become envious. So when you think about the seven deadly sins, and I know I've talked about the seven deadly sins a lot. Some people get tired of me talking about the seven deadly sins. I know my wife thinks I mention them too often. She's over here right now. She's just kind of chuckling, I'm sure, as I'm mentioning the seven deadly sins. Because, if you think about what they are, there's wrath, there's envy, there's greed, there's pride, there's sloth. What are the other two? Sloth, and then there's what are the other ones? Hold on. Let me type these out. Okay, so we have wrath. Okay. Then we have pride, envy, lust. Okay. There we go. And gluttony. So gluttony is the other one. Okay. So when you think about those seven deadly sins of what can go wrong, when you think about it in the context, as Jules has said, this is everything that's wrong in the world right now. This is something that's always wrong in the world. We have right now in our society at large, and I think this does tie into this of what's happening with the 7 years of surplus and then 7 years of famine. If gluttony, for example, is excessively wanting more than your fair share, where you can't satisfy your appetite. It doesn't have to be necessarily an appetite for just food. You can be gluttonous with regards to the acquiring power. You can't have enough power. So that can be a form of gluttony, that you just never have your fill. And in some respects, if you have balance with regards to what you think power should be, and you don't overdo it with regards to over consuming, you're less likely to have problems when times are lean. So if you can store some of your excess over time, you can deal with those more difficult times, the leaner times, by keeping gluttony in check. Obviously, sloth is, that's just another fancy word for laziness. God does favor the industrious. I do believe that. And if you have the ability, you should actually work up to your full potential and not be lazy and put things off and then never get to them. You should actually act as though your life can be over at any time. And I know that's a hard thing to say, but if you live your life as though every day is a gift and you give it everything you've got, you're less likely to be sloth, like sloth, and be lazy. So that's what sloth means. So then the third thing in the story, obviously in this story, the concept of lust is covered. This is when Joseph first got there, and he was a house servant. He was trying to be. They were, the wife of who he was responsible for, like in terms of answering to. She tried to seduce him, so she was using lust to get a hold of his natural. I guess I don't want to say natural, but trying to take advantage of human weakness and possibly doing something you shouldn't do by letting your hormones get the best of you. So fortunately, he did not do that, but as a result, he ended up being thrown into prison, and he followed his values. But lust was one of the seven deadly sins that was used against him. Obviously, we talked about envy with the siblings. Okay, so then we talk about, you can talk about pride. Pride is when your own self-importance makes you disregard other people around you. And in the story of Joseph, Pride. Maybe his father had too much pride. Maybe Jacob had too much pride about Joseph that created a lot of these problems. I'm not exactly sure, but it doesn't seem too far-fetched that pride got the best of Jacob, and this is the problem that led to Joseph's, ending up in the situation he was in. But at the same time, if Joseph did not end up in the situation in which he was jailed, in which he did get in contact with the Pharaoh, in which he did help prepare Egypt for the famine, who knows if things would have ever turned out, for Egypt as well as for Joseph. So it's a really fascinating story, because which part would you do away with? And I'm not exactly sure that doing away with any part would have been a good idea. But it's pretty fascinating that when you think about this story in the context of destiny and what God's plans are for you, that if you follow the plan, it will play out the way God intended. In the case of Joseph, if he would have buckled to lust, maybe this plan would have never played out. Maybe there would have been, hundreds of thousands, if not more, people starving to death during the famine in Egypt, as well as all the surrounding areas. We just really don't know. So, that's the other thing to think about. And then obviously wrath, when the husband finds out that the wife tells him that Joseph was possibly cheating or was attempting to cheat with her. He uses his wrath and has him arrested. Wrath can also be the baker being executed by the Pharaoh. That can be a form of wrath. So between wrath, between lust, between the greed, what would be greedy in this point is I'm not sure what greed in this story would be. But what's interesting about the 7 deadly sins is if you look at a lot of various, what would be deemed to be great books or great works of literature, they tend to cover all 7 of the spectrum of the 7 deadly sins. But these are 7 weaknesses of being a human being. So it's funny because God, Jesus Christ came here to save the world of our sins. And it just so happens that the 7 deadly sins are the sins that most human beings are prone to commit. But even after human beings and us being children of God, we commit those sins, we're still forgiven and we're still saved nonetheless by putting Jesus Christ and God first. So anyways, I do think that's pretty fascinating. And I have noticed that over my lifetime that those sins continue to repeat themselves in various cycles all around us. So so let's go to Matthew 13. Here's another story Jesus told. The kingdom of heaven is like a farmer who planted good seed in his field. But that night the worker slept, his enemy came and planted weeds among the wheat, then slipped away. When the crop began to grow and produce grains, the weeds also grew. The farmer's workers went to him and said, "Sir, the field where you planted the good seed is full of weeds. Where did they come from?" "An enemy has done this," the farmer said. "Should we pull out the weeds?" "No, you'll uproot the wheat if you do. Let both grow until the harvest. Then I will tell the harvesters to sort out the weeds, tie them into bundles, burn them, and put the wheat in the barn." Here's another illustration Jesus used. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed planted in a field. It is the smallest of all seeds, but it becomes the largest of garden plants. It grows into a tree, and birds come and make nests in its branches. Jesus also used the illustration. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast. A woman used in making bread, even though she puts only a little yeast into 3 measures of flour, it permeated every part of the dough. Jesus always liked to use stories and illustrations when speaking to crowds. In fact, he never spoke to them without using such parables. This fulfilled what God has spoken through the prophet. I will speak to you in parables. I will explain things hidden since the creation of the world. So, when you think about that, and I've talked about this before, even if you do not believe the Bible is a religious document and you don't believe in God, and you're someone who's secular and just doesn't believe in the Holy Spirit, God, the Father and Son, etc. But if you just look at the document, you look at the Bible, and you study the stories of the Bible, you will find tremendous lessons that you can apply not only to your current situation in life, but probably to your past situations as you've matured going through your life. And not just you, but family, friends, your parents. There's so many parallels that are captured in the Bible with regards to human behavior. So now you can say that this is all chance, that someone was just extremely good at figuring all these things out about human beings 2,000 years ago, which I guess anything is possible. But if you think about divine inspiration, and you think about the fact that these things were explained with such clarity and with such parables that people with far less education could relate to them in their everyday existence, and that these parables would stand the test of time for thousands of years. Think about that. Not for thousands of days, thousands of years. So I want you to think back about what you have written or what you've created over your lifetime that you can point to that has lasted over 1,000 or 2,000 days. So 3 to 6 years. Like, what can you point to that you're like, wow, what I wrote 6 years ago is super accurate and holds true today? Now, I'm sure you're going to find a couple things here and there. But now I want you to imagine thousands of like I think it's at least 500 to 1,000 pages of material that you can say the same thing about. So that's just something to think about when you think about all these stories and the importance of parables in the stories. So Jesus replied, "The Son of Man is the farmer who plants the good seed. The field is the world, and the good seed represents the people of the kingdom. The weeds are the people that belong to the evil one. The enemy who planted the weeds among the wheat is the devil. The harvest is the end of the world, and the harvesters are the angels. Just as the weeds are sorted out and burned in the fire, so it will be the end of the world. The Son of Man will send his angels, and they will remove from his kingdom anything that causes sin and all who do evil. And the angels will throw them into the fiery furnace, where they will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in their Father's kingdom. Anyone who with ears to hear should listen and understand. The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure that a man discovered hidden in a field. It is this excitement he hid it again and sold everything he owned to get enough money to buy the field. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant on the lookout for choice pearls. When he discovered a pearl of great value, he sold everything he owned and bought it." So when you think about the message of this, the message of Christ, the message of righteousness, it's important. Like, even if you look around your house, and we can all gain a lot from purging things that we don't get a lot of value out of. So, for example, if you look around your house and you have a bunch of books, and let's just say you have hundreds of books. I happen to have, I probably have, between everything, at least 700 to 1,000 books. My wife has been giving me grief about having so many books, and I understand that. And so she's kind of asked me, before I purchase more books, try to get rid of something that you don't need or you don't want to reference, or it might be a duplicate. So sometimes I have books on the same subject, and I have a couple different perspectives. So she's asking me to pick which one should I keep. But when you clear your mind with not just your mind, but your physical environment of things that are excessive, that you do not need, and that you can maybe do without, this is what is being talked about with regards to a pearl. If you get rid of things that have less value to you, or you're forced to choose what holds more value for you, you'll get more out of the life of that thing that has higher value than you would ever get out of it if you have too much other stuff distracting you from the beauty of it. And I think that's the key takeaway from that. So let me repeat it again, maybe a little different. If you have 50 friends and you have 10 minutes to spend with each one, that's 500 minutes. So what is that? About 8 hours or so. So 8 hours and what is that? 20 minutes or something. So you have 8 hours to spend with 50 different people. Now, granted, you might enjoy each of those 10 minutes. I get it. But now if you said, you know what? I spent 10 minutes with 50 people, and that's great. But what if I cut it to where I have some acquaintances with those 50 people? Let's just say it's 40 of them, and I just talk to them for 2-3 minutes, okay? But the rest of them, I spend 20 minutes, 30 minutes with each of the remainder. So 10 people, I spend 30 minutes, which is 300 minutes, and then the other 200 minutes I divvy up among the 40 people, which comes out to about 5 minutes. So I go from 10 minutes on everybody to 10 people with 30 minutes, and 40 people with 5 minutes each. The people that you cut the time with by doing that, maybe it frees up their time to go spend on people that will be more meaningful to them. But then your acquaintance time is still valuable, that you still kept that 5-minute connection. But then the people that really meant a lot to you, they got 3 times as much time as they did before, and it's a much stronger connection. It's the same concept. And so you should try to figure out what really gives you the most value, because usually what you value most with regards to relationships, friendships, material goods, I do believe there is a pushback where those relationships and that also also feels and senses the same reciprocity, so to speak. It works both ways, is what I'm saying. If you value somebody for 30 minutes and they know how precious your time is and they value their own time, they're also going to get that much more out of it because you made that decision to make them a larger part of your life. They're more likely to also make you a larger part of their life. And so it just strengthens the connection and the relationship. And I think that's the main part of that, this, let me see, I think that's probably Matthew. Yep, sure enough, it's always Matthew. Anyways, Matthew 13. You know how much I love Matthew. So Matthew is my confirmation name, by the way. I don't think it was a coincidence in hindsight. When I was confirmed in 8th grade, I chose Matthew as my choice for my confirmation name. For the choir director, okay. I love you, Lord. You are my strength. The Lord is my rock, my fortress, and my Savior. My God is my rock, in whom I find protection. He is my shield, the power that saves me, and the place of safety. I called on the Lord, who is worthy of praise, and he saved me from enemies. The ropes of death entangled me. Floods of destruction swept over me. The grave wrapped its ropes around me. Death laid a trap in my path. But in my distress I cried out to the Lord. Yes, I prayed to my God for help. He heard me from his sanctuary. My cry to him reached his ears. Let me just keep going here. Then the earth quaked and trembled. The foundations of mountains shook. They quaked because of his anger. Smoke poured from his nostrils. Fierce flame leapt from his mouth. Glowing coals blazed forth from him. He opened the heavens and came down. Dark storm clouds were beneath his feet. Mounted on a mighty angelic being, he flew. Soaring on the wings of the wind, he shrouded himself in darkness, veiling his approach with dark rain clouds. Thick clouds shielded the brightness around him, and rained down in burning coals. The Lord thundered from heaven. The voice of the Most High resounded amid the hall in burning coals. He shot his arrows and scattered his enemies. Great bolts of lightning flashed, and they were confused. Then, at your command, O Lord, at the blast of your breath, the bottom of the sea could be seen, and the foundations of earth were laid bare. So this is Psalms 18. And I guess, what's the takeaway with this? If you think about nature, right? We think about the mountains. If any of you have gone mountain climbing, or maybe not climbed the mountain, but stood next to a mountain, or you were in the middle of a storm. You could be in a storm, obviously anywhere. It could be a storm in Florida. It could be a really bad tropical storm, I guess, if you're traveling to Florida or something else, or you live in Florida. The sheer power of nature is unbelievable, and you really feel when you're in the middle of nature, like in any way, shape, or form. Like if you're in the middle of a national forest, or you're in the middle of a glacier, or you're in the middle of the ocean, and even when you're in a boat in the middle of the ocean, and you look around and you recognize how absolutely minuscule you are. It's almost like an ant walking around your house. If you see an ant somewhere that shows up because your kids left out candy, for example, that's a perfect example of, if you relate to that ant as a human being in the larger world. These ants are just kind of walking around, and they're oblivious. Maybe they know, maybe they're not oblivious, and we think they are, but how tiny they are in the relationship to that environment. I mean, I don't know. What is an ant? Maybe 1/1,000,000th of the size of us? I've never really added it up. I don't know how much an ant weighs. Maybe that's something we should look into. But if there's 16 ounces in a pound, and somebody weighs, for example, 200 pounds, so 16 times 200, it would be 2,000. That'd be 3,200 ounces. Let's see how much one ant weighs. One ant weighs, 1 and 5 milligrams, between 1 and 5 milligrams. Wow. The combined weight of all the ants on planet Earth is greater than the combined weight of every single human being. That's pretty wild. So, that's a pretty interesting little stat, that all the ants on planet Earth weigh more than all the human beings on planet Earth. How many pounds? How many ants in a pound? Ants per human. Okay. How about in a pound? I'm just curious because this kind of fits with this story here. So when I'm thinking about it, wow. Depending on the species, there are anywhere between 190,000 to 7.5 million ants in a pound. Holy cow. So think about that, okay? I just said that if somebody weighs, 200 pounds, So that means if there's 190,000 to 7.5 million ants per pound, okay? So let's just put it at a million. So a million, that would be 200 million pounds for 1 million ants per pound. But if they're light ants, you're talking about there could be 1 billion ants for one human being. Now that's really wild. So when I was talking about the analogy between ants, and how when we look at ants and how small they are in relationship to our environment, and then we think about ourselves in relationship to nature, that once again, you know what I'm going to say, fractal geometry, that there's all these systems where these lessons about life and the way the planet is organized and our species are all around us, all these different lessons, if we choose to look for them, if we choose to look at what is the connection between how ants behave and us. For example, I use an analogy of cats all the time. Cats are extremely independent, and most conservatives are very independent. So trying to organize conservatives for example, in the Republican Party or other conservative parties is like trying to round up cats, like trying to get cats to agree on what they should do next. It's an extremely difficult thing to do. And this is one of the reasons why the Republicans have struggled and had a very difficult time against the Democrats, where, people seem to fall in line a little bit more. So anyway, same kind of analogy. You look at nature, you look at the connection between nature and the way human beings behave. Since we are of this world, we live in this world, I guess it seems to make sense that we would behave with similar systems of how this world is set up and behaves. Okay. My children, listen when your father corrects you. Pay attention and learn good judgment, for I am giving you good guidance. Don't turn away from my instructions, for I too was once my father's son, tenderly loved as my mother's only child. My father taught me, take my words to heart, follow my commands, and you will live. Get wisdom, develop good judgment. Don't forget my words or turn away from them. Don't turn your back on wisdom, for she will protect you. Love her, and she will guide you. And so this is a really interesting lesson. Okay, so if you sit down, and, for example, I was just talking to a director. Okay, and, one of the reasons why I'm here in DC. I may or may not be in a movie. I'm not sure how many parts. Maybe it'll be like 10 seconds, as somebody will say. I know I recorded about 3 hours of material to possibly be in a movie about this voter situation. But maybe I'll be in the movie for 10 seconds. Maybe it'll be a minute. I don't know. I have no idea. I don't really have any expectations about how much time I will be in the movie. But I was asked to be part of it. And the reason why I'm telling you this story is as I'm reading this story that this director told me about why he became a director. I told him he should make a movie about it, by the way, is phenomenal. He said he was about 12 years old, and he was looking out the window of his house. So maybe if he's watching this, I'll send him this clip. Or if he's not watching this, I'll cut this out and send it to him. See if I got it right, the details. So he said, because Bobby, I was looking out the window. I was 12 years old, and all of a sudden, I see this mother bird pushing the birds out of the nest. These little baby birds, little robins, and mother bird pushed the bird out, and then boom, the bird takes off and starts flying. Pushes the second one out. So it's got to be pretty cool to catch this in the moment, right? Because how many times are you going to see a mother push the bird out for its first flight, right? So when I think about this story, when I think about the story that I just read in Proverbs 4, I think about the story that this director just told me not today, he told me yesterday. So I just heard the story yesterday, but it already feels as though I've known it for a long time. And maybe that's when you know you've heard a good story. It kind of resonates through time. And so he watches this happen, and then the mother bird pushes out one of the other birds. And then as the bird, he doesn't fly. He just goes straight down and boom, hits the ground. And the bird breaks its wing. The bird ends up breaking its wing. So then, he's like, holy cow, he just witnessed this bird being pushed out by its mother. And the bird breaks its wing, because the other two birds flew. This one did not. So he's kind of watching, this bird, and then watch the mother bird come down and try to kind of nudge the bird to keep flying. But his wing is all jangled up. And, he ends up watching and seeing what's going to happen next. The bird just kind of hides, and sure enough, nighttime comes. He's worried about the bird being eaten. So he ends up taking the bird and starts, puts it in a shoebox, sneaks him into his house, and then proceeds to nurse this bird back to health, feeding him worms at 12 years old. And, he didn't want to let this bird die, so he took it upon himself to save this bird's life. So then as he's doing all this, he ends up, having the bird learn to stand on his finger, teaches him how to open his wings, all this type of stuff. And if it's a baby bird, they'll learn these things. I worked at a pet store. We actually raised macaws, and we would tube feed them so that they would not be afraid of human beings. And it's extremely effective. So birds are pretty open to being trained not to be fearful of humans if they're used to that interaction. So him telling this story, I've lived it firsthand with much bigger birds than robins. I've helped, feed macaws in the middle of the night, feeding them through a tube to make sure that they would grow up and be around human beings and not be afraid of humans. Right? That's why I don't know what they cost now, but back then a macaw we would sell them for like $2,000 to $3,000 at the pet store that I worked at. What is a macaw sold for? So now a macaw, macaws for sale now is wow, holy cow! A hyacinth macaw is $25,000 now. So keep in mind, this was about 20 years ago. Yeah, so they're about $4,000, $2,000 to $4,000. Okay, so when we sold them for $2,000, but they're hand raised. Anyways, so these birds, he did all this, and then sure enough, the day came for him to release this robin, and then he ends up coming outside and decides to see if the bird will fly. He kind of pushes the bird off. The bird flies like 300 feet across his yard, goes flying. He's so proud that he's like, wow, I got this bird, raised him, he got his wing fixed, and he lands right on this brick wall, I guess not too far from his house. And then right as he lands on that brick wall, woof, a cat just snaps him right up and eats him. Like literally, like a neighborhood cat or something. And he was just shocked. He's like, I did all this work. I raised this robin. And he just witnessed life and death. That bird should have died. You saved that bird. The bird ends up flying, lands, gets eaten. So all the work that he did, he still couldn't prevent whatever that bird's fate was. So, when I'm sitting there reading this, listen to your father, make sure you have good judgment, good guidance, right? I'm thinking about the fact that how do you teach the lesson of good guidance? How do you teach what you should do before the person or the child or the individual has the mental understanding of what that means? So in this case, he was not a mother bird. He was not a bird. He was a human being trying to raise a bird. So that bird probably didn't learn some of the guidance that it needed to survive in the world where there's predators. Now, don't get me wrong, there's plenty of birds that end up getting eaten by cats and other animals because, it's just they're part of the food chain, and that's just the way it is. But to be eaten so quickly after flying in the environment is probably something that wouldn't have happened if the bird was in fact raised by its mother, if it never broke its wing. And when you're thinking about these lessons about, well, do I want to make my own mistakes and be like that bird where I think I understand the environment, I'm just going to fly and just wing it, right? I mean, that's the way it is. If you just want to wing it through life, not think about it too much, and just hope for the best, then you shouldn't worry about learning any insights from your parents or from close family and friends or from the greatest book ever written. But if you don't want to wing it and you want to be more prepared for the difficulties that life can throw at you, and that you have some perspective and you have some frameworks and you have some ideas of how you might want to react because you kind of heard other stories and so forth of how things did not work out for others that didn't know how to react, then you should seriously look at studying, some of the lessons, even if you're not religious, in the greatest book ever written. And I think you'd get a lot out of it. And I think that you'll likely make better decisions. And frankly, you have a better chance of surviving like that bird could have had if it had maybe a teacher that was a bird instead of a human being. So that, in the case of the stories in the Bible and the parables, those are other human beings. Those are stories of other human beings that everybody can relate to. So instead of living through that yourself, sometimes it's better to learn from the pain of others than having to experience the pain yourself, is the whole point of the story. So with that, I hope everybody, picked up one or two things, or maybe my voice helps put you to sleep. Either way, I'm fine with that. If that's what it helps do, then so be it. Anyways, with that being said, I hope you guys have a wonderful evening. God bless you. God bless your family and friends. May God continue to bless the greatest nation in the history of the world. Peace be with you. And if you don't have peace, if you put God first, I have no doubt that you'll find it. I'm just reading what Jim said here. Jim, he said, I remember before I accepted Christ, my heart hurts for people in misery without this knowledge. Everybody have a nice weekend as well. But I will be online tomorrow night. It will be day 21 of 365. So in general, I'm glad my wife was able to chime in and let everybody know that I was going to be running late. And like I said, I'm not one to break a streak. So I don't care if I have to come in right under the wire at 11:59. If I come in under the wire, then I'm going to go. And if you guys aren't there, you can always play my recap, play it the next morning. So, thank you everybody for listening. I hope you got something out of it and that you're reading along as well. So, thank you so much. I hope everybody has a wonderful evening. I love all of you. And, be safe and keep praying for the nation because we need as many prayers as we can for this country. We have a lot of work ahead of us, but I have no doubt that we will win, we will succeed, and never lose sight of the fact that God does prevail. And since we're children of God, we will prevail as well if we do our part. If we don't do our part, it's going to be a difficult road ahead. So have a wonderful evening. Thanks again. Good night.